How to counter the Blight. The Blight has one of the most oppressive powers in the entire game. It gives him mobility, lethality, and even wall and pallet breaking abilities, all of which can get even more ridiculous with his insane collection of add-ons. So how do we counter him? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that Blights are very aggressive. As soon as the game starts, and whenever they are done hooking someone, they'll use info perks or their own intuition to immediately rush across the map and transition from the end of one chase to the start of the next. If this traversal rush ends up hitting someone, this gives the Blight a massive advantage. Depending on add-ons, he might insta-down the survivor, get a full recharge of his rush tokens and be ready to go again, or simply be fast enough to catch them again before they can reach safety. So as a survivor, if you suspect that a Blight is using several rushes to close the gap towards you and approach you, you need to make sure that you don't give him an easy hit at the end of them. This initial hit needs to be avoided at all costs. You should also avoid doing objectives in isolated areas with very high visibility, because getting hit here is almost unavoidable. And if you have to, at least leave early and don't wait until the last second, because you will get hit. In a desperate situation where no other safety is available, you can still use some medium-sized obstacles to try to deny the first hit, and hopefully you'll have time to make it somewhere safer afterwards. Instead of being in places like that, consider doing gens next to small loops or other obstacles that he cannot easily rush through. In places like this, you're not 100% safe either. You might have to drop a pallet or use your exhaustion perk to be safe, but it's still much better than giving a free hit right at the start. Your safest option by far are gens on elevated platforms that provide good visibility, but also make it very hard for him to immediately reach you. Working on this is always a good idea, especially if you're injured or dead on hook and you are a bit vulnerable and need to play it extra safe. Some maps have complex buildings where it's almost impossible for a Blight to catch up to you easily, and using this can extend your chases very significantly. Since he'll be indoors, you're also partially removing his ability to see what's going on around the map, and he won't know exactly where to go next, at least not as easily. Gens that are inside such buildings need to be approached as a team. If they can be done fast while the killer is busy elsewhere, perfect. Now you have an ideal place to run the killer to after they're done. But if you're working on them as a clueless solo player without any coordination, you might actually be robbing your team of a good place to run the killer. So be careful, and keep in mind that sometimes even looping the exterior of a building can be useful if the killer has nothing to bump around it. Without nothing to bump on it, the Blight cannot use his power effectively. So keep an eye out for places like this, because they limit his options and make the chase a little bit more predictable for you. Luckily for us, the Blight's power has certain cooldowns, and if you understand how they work, your chases might benefit a lot from it. He operates on a token system where he has a limited number of rushes, and when they're over, he needs to wait before he can use his power again. From the point of view of you, the survivor, it's very simple. Once you see him rushing towards you, keep in mind that he can generally bump up to 4 extra times. Try to get into the habit of counting this in your head, and if you see him use too many of them, you can strategically wait out the last one and then make a run for it during his recovery. Ideally, if you make him waste all of his tokens, you'll have a little over 10 seconds before he can rush again. And this is the magical window where all of the normal rules get reversed. For instance, running in the open towards a safer place is extremely risky. Here, the Blight would normally just catch up to you, but it is actually a really good idea during his cooldown. Similarly, if a pallet has a very simple structure around it, or if there's easy places to bounce into, you want to drop this one very early to be safe. Otherwise, he will just do one simple rush and get you before you can actually go around it. But again, if he's in cooldown, you don't need to worry about him using his rush immediately, and you can actually play the pallet a little bit more and get a little bit more value and time out of it before you're forced to drop it. And the same goes for almost any other risky action. If you notice that he's in cooldown, you might just be able to get away with it before he can catch up. Unfortunately, if he's only used a couple rushes or if he has certain add-ons, judging the downtime of his power can be really difficult, and this is something that hopefully you'll get better at with time. And now for some tips to help us last a little bit longer in chase. When starting his first non-lethal rush, the Blight cannot attack you yet, so at this time, you can pallet stun him very safely. Normally during this first rush, the Blight player is aiming at a certain obstacle to bump into, and if you predict what that obstacle is, you can actually use your body to body block it, which will make him slide over and miss it completely. Some common places where you can do this include the fire barrels in some TL walls, the doorways at Shack, and some edges found in common jungle gyms. In some cases, you can even lock him in place until his rush ends. This requires a fair bit of knowledge of how his hitbox works and what places he can and cannot bump into, but it's something you can do if you have that experience. Keep in mind that once he's already bumped once, his next rushes are lethal and he can hit you during these. At this point, use any line of sight blocker to deny information and force him to do additional rushes to catch up. Do not let him have a clear view of where you are and do not give him a straight line to follow into you. Another trick that you can do around buildings and doorways in general is to pretend to go inside them and then wait by the edge only to leave as soon as the Blight follows you in. This can be a great way to counter speed add-ons, but it's quite risky if he has auto-reading add-ons or perks. You'll get hit right away. If he's already doing a lethal rush and getting very close to you, you're most likely going to get hit, but there are still a few things you can do to try to avoid it. The first one is to do a little zigzag to fake out your direction. This can work in the open, but it's particularly effective if you do it around corners. If you notice that he's standing on ground that is slightly elevated above you, you can also take advantage of this and crouch when he's about to attack you, which will make his hitbox miss. This isn't 100% reliable, but it can help in places like the basement stairs. Crouching in general makes your hitbox harder to hit for him, and for some reason this is pretty effective around pallets where he might vacuum into them instead of hitting you, so it's something that you can do as a very final resort. At the end of the day, Blight is one of the best killers in the game, and playing against a good one is going to be difficult, but it can really help if you pay attention to their playstyle and identify their weakness. Against Blights that are very ambitious and go for fancy flicks, sometimes you can leave the tile early or make some risky guess to see if they mind game themselves. And since the Blight is a very common pick in tournaments and other competitive 1v1 events, there are many places where you can watch high-level players go against him and routinely do pretty well, or as well as you can at least. And of course, don't forget that the Blight's add-ons are a huge part of his power, so if this little list isn't enough, go watch my tier list where I break them down into more detail. Good luck out there.